السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. إنه من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, O you who believe, have taqwa in Allah and fear Him as He should be feared, and die not except in a state of Islam. Now, today inshallah, for the topic of our khutbah, we're going to be sticking with the theme of some of the best people in history, those being the companions and followers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the person we're going to be focusing on today inshallah is a man by the name of Mus'ab ibn Umayr. Now, Mus'ab ibn Umayr, he's one of the people you would refer to as as-sabiqun al-awwalun, basically meaning one of the first forerunners, one of the first forerunners of Islam, the very first people who followed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and accepted Islam in Mecca. Now, Mus'ab ibn Umayr, his status in Islam and his significance, it's something that we can all take from, and I'm sure, and many scholars refer to him in many different ways. Some refer to him as the first ambassador of Islam, as he was the very first bridge between the Ansar and the Muhajirun. And there are many things we could take away from the story of Mus'ab ibn Umayr. Now, for today, inshallah, the main thing we're going to be focusing on is his early life, his upbringing, and kind of his early story into how he became a Muslim, and what we could learn, especially as youth, from his story and his sacrifices that he made. Now, Mus'ab ibn Umayr was from a small tribe in one of the small tribes of Quraysh, called Banu Abdari. Now, this tribe, while they were one of the smallest, they were also one of the wealthiest tribes in Quraysh. And being one of the wealthiest tribes, Mus'ab ibn Umayr, he was basically he was the richest person of that tribe. So they're already a tribe that are already very wealthy. Of those people, he was the richest of them. And his riches, they were not, he wasn't, he didn't grow up poor and then, through his work, through his business, and he made money. That wasn't the case with him. He inherited from birth a very large amount of wealth from his father, who was Umayr ibn Hashim, and his mother, Khunnas bint Malik. So these were Umayr's two parents, and he was basically already born into this extreme luxurious wealth. And his mother, he was the only child of his mother. So in a sense, Mus'ab ibn Umayr ended up, he was the main focus of his mother, really. And as any mother, alhamdulillah, our mothers love us and adore us, and she adored Mus'ab so much so that even as a baby, she would enshroud him in garments of silk and gold. So he was basically born. He was born with all these riches that many of us, many people at that time couldn't even dream of. as a baby. He doesn't even know what's happening really, and he's already being adorned with all these riches. So Mus'ab's mother, she loved him very much. And as we said, he inherited this wealth, and the amount of wealth he inherited, it was so much so that you would say that he had half the wealth of the people in Mecca. Like the amount that he inherited, it would equal to half of the wealth of everyone else in Mecca. That's how much that he had inherited under his name, even as a young child, just straight up from birth, from his inheritance. So you could already see Mus'ab ibn Umair, he's already living this, this modern day, you'd say millionaire, billionaire lifestyle as a baby, as a kid. And usually, a lot of times you tend to see people like that, especially when they grow up into it. They're usually very stuck up. They're spoiled and bratty. And in a sense, for lack of a better word, his mother, Mus'ab's mother, did spoil him. As a baby, they would give him the best of clothes, the best of jewelry, of perfumes, all this stuff. They would give him the best of everything, even his shoes, his clothes, everything was tailored for him. So, but despite this, Mus'ab himself, despite this wealth that he had as a young child, he still had strong character. He still didn't let this get to his head, or he was never arrogant or disrespectful to others and belittled others. That's just to show, even before he was Muslim, Mus'ab's character before then, he was still a man with good character who wouldn't belittle others or disrespect others for not having as much wealth as him. And Mus'ab at this time, he was what one would call a trendsetter. Modern day celebrities, you'd have them, let's say they wear something or they have a certain hairstyle or they promote something, and people listen to them, right? Mus'ab at that time, he was that celebrity. He was that person that everyone wanted to be like. They would literally try and, the garments that he wore, they would try and, that was in style. That's what people would try and emulate and be like. Even the perfumes that he would wear, the people who would sell perfume, they would try and, dilute their scents to make it so that it smells like that of Mus'ab. So imagine at such a young age, essentially, even into his teens, around our age, basically, right? And imagine having all this attention, all this wealth, all this, I'm the man, I'm this, I'm that, right? You have all these things at your fingertips, and everything is in the ball is in your court, everything is in your control, and you have everything that you could even ask for that many people desire and won't have, right? So everything's going well. Mus'ab, he's this rich young guy. Everyone loves him. Everyone wants to be like him. Until he hears about what's known as Dar al-Arqam, and he hears that it's basically this place that Prophet Muhammad والسلام, and a few other companions. Because remember, this is still the early stages of Islam in Mecca, right? The Muslims are not publicly practicing Islam. So Dar al-Arqam would basically be a place where the Prophet ﷺ and a few other companions, 10, 15, a small amount of companions, they would go in seclusion basically, and he would teach them about Islam, and they would practice Islam together. They would pray, study the Quran, all these things. So Mus'ab, he heard about this before. He heard about Dar al-Arqam, and he was curious. He was like, what is this new thing that's going on? And keep in mind, his family beforehand, they were one of the people that were heavily against Islam at this time. So, but he had this curiosity. I wanted to know what this man Muhammad is saying. So he goes to this place of Dar al-Arqam, and he does it in the middle of the night. He's doing this, and because usually the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, they would meet in these times of the day where there were very few people out, obviously to keep everything secretive. And Mus'ab, when he came to the doors of Dar al-Arqam, he knocked very lightly, just like very ever so slightly, just to, because obviously he didn't want anyone to see what he was doing. So he ends up he walks through the door, and all the companions, they're in shock. They're like, they're like, this is Mus'ab, this is this wealthy man, this non-Muslim man, his family is against us. Like, they were in such shock that he came. Like, imagine for us youth, imagine you saw Messi or Ronaldo just walk in through our I'tikaf halaqah while we're doing a halaqah. It would be crazy, right? You'd be like, what in the world's happening? Like, what's he doing here? You'd have so many questions. And remember, we said Mus'ab, he had that celebrity status at that time. So when he walked in, they were in such shock. They were so confused as to, wow, like, what's Mus'ab doing here? Like, is something wrong? And the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't stop his lecture that he was giving to the companions. He continued, and the subject he was talking about was the subject of the hereafter, of heaven and hell, and things of these nature. And then after he was finished advising the companions, he started talking to Mus'ab. Mus'ab started asking a few questions, and on that spot, in that moment, Mus'ab accepted Islam after that brief exchange and that first interaction he had with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So initially, you already see Mus'ab, his heart was already, he accepted Islam very quickly. Just in his first interaction with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he accepted Islam. Now, obviously, it's great, right? A new Muslim, one of the best companions. Obviously, we'd see that he would go on to be. But now this is where a major change happens, right? Because now him being Muslim, this kind of sets a conflict between him and his family and his status in the community. Because obviously, Islam, it was not the norm at that time. In fact, people were being persecuted for being Muslim. So now Mus'ab, he essentially he starts to become one of the students of the Prophet ﷺ, one of these students that go and learn from him and pray with them. And they would do, like we said, they were doing this very secretively at first, in the early stages. Until one day, a man by the name of Uthman ibn Talib, he catches Mus'ab. He catches, and obviously this man, he would later on become a Muslim, like towards the end, many years later. But at this time, he was one of the staunch enemies of Islam, and he found Mus'ab, and he basically decides to tell who the person who adored him most. He tells his mother. And when his mother heard this, she was in shock. She was like, "What? No way that Mus'ab, my son, has followed Muhammad." And she didn't believe him at first, until she asked Mus'ab himself. And obviously Mus'ab, he was upfront about it. He wasn't gonna lie and say, "I'm not Muslim." He said, he admitted to it. He openly admitted to it, and he told her, that he's now Muslim. So upon hearing this, his mother was very disappointed. She was very upset with him. And she kept imploring him to, leave Islam, leave Muhammad, forget about this whole thing, And obviously Mus'ab, with his strong faith and character, he constantly refused. So much so to the point where she decided to imprison him. So Mus'ab's mother, she imprisons him now, and she basically, when we're kids, we can't even stand getting grounded for a day or a week, right? Mus'ab was just, you're stuck here until you leave Islam. So obviously imagine one of us, and even in this situation, Mus'ab did not raise his voice or become aggressive with his mother and be disrespectful, even though this was such, this is a form of oppression, right? Even though it's by his own mother, she's in a sense oppressing him. She's not letting him leave the house. She's trapping him just for him being Muslim. So a side point that we could learn from this is that when we're dealing with our parents, even though alhamdulillah, I'm sure our parents aren't asking us to leave Islam, they might be asking us to do a certain chore, and we might not be willing to do it. And we might raise our voices just for something so simple and so petty. When Mus'ab ibn Umayr was being literally imprisoned by his mother, even though he disagreed with her, obviously, and he didn't obey her command of leaving Islam, he made sure to stay respectful. And that just speaks to the quality and the character of Mus'ab ibn Umayr, and how we should learn from that as Muslims when we're dealing with our parents to be respectful. So Mus'ab, he's imprisoned by his mother. And keep in mind, remember, he had all the wealth before, he was the man. And now he's essentially become a prisoner of his own mother. And then later on, Mus'ab, he finds out there's a group of Muslims. This is one of the earliest migrations of the Muslims from a different location. So he found out they were going to a place called Abyssinia. And he wanted to go on this migration. He saw that, they were going to, there was a group that was going, and it was one of the early groups that were heading out on this migration. So Mus'ab, when his guard, the one that was watching him, he wasn't noticing. He essentially was able to escape, and he made it with this group that was traveling to Abyssinia. And now later on, he arrives to Abyssinia, but now he doesn't have all his wealth. He's just he's a man in uncharted territory. Then he has to start his life there and figure everything out. He eventually gets married, and then he basically has to build himself up from that point on. Keep in mind, he's still very young. He's still around our age in his teenage years. So he goes to Abyssinia, and then later on he hears a rumor that Islam has become widespread in Mecca. Like Islam is the new thing. Like everyone's Muslim now. Like it's basically it's safe to go back. Everything is good. So obviously being excited, he decides to get his stuff and he goes to Mecca. Unfortunately, upon coming back, he realizes that this rumor wasn't in fact true. Things haven't changed yet. The situation was still that the Muslims were not, they were not in charge. The Quraysh were still, against the Muslims. So he comes now and he realizes that, this wasn't true. And but it's a really tough situation, because now he comes back to the place where obviously, the people don't accept him now after he left his Islam. Now, and who do you think the first person he goes to tell, the first person he goes to visit when he comes back from Abyssinia? Now his mother, he visits the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He checks in with him. He makes sure he's okay, and he just asks, checks up on him. And then he goes to his mother later on. And his mother, she scolds him. She scolds him for saying, for going to the Prophet first and not he scolds him for going to the Prophet first and not to her, right? How could you go to the Prophet and not your own mother first? And he told her basically that, and I'm paraphrasing, he told her that basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he did better for me through the Prophet, basically taking me out of my darkness and bringing me into light than what you did for me. Just to show how much the value of Islam was and how he valued his religion. So much so to the point that he saw him being Muslim, Allah guiding him, was better than even all the things that his mother did for him, the wealth, the bringing him into this life. So, and she continues to insist that if you continue to be Muslim, I'll imprison you again, I'll do this and that. And he continues to, oppose her. And this time he opposes her a bit more, because obviously she's continuing to have these threats. He's saying that, mother, if the person that you're gonna put to guard me, I will do whatever I need to do to get rid of him. Like I will, it's getting to that point where he's saying, just don't bother, try imprisoning me. So ultimately, he ends up leaving his mother, but now he has, like we said, he has no money to his name. He doesn't have all his inherited wealth. He doesn't have all these things that he once had before. Now he's just, he's got zero. Walking out the door, he has nothing with him. Obviously, but he still has Islam, right? Which is the most important thing. And he knew that. He knew that he had all these all this wealth, all these riches, but he valued Islam more than all of that, which is very difficult. You'd think that Mus'ab, being born as a rich, being born into wealth, he wouldn't have that strength. Usually it takes, to build strength of character, you need to go through a bit of hardship. You grow up with some difficulties. Mus'ab didn't have that. So you'd think he would break and fall and crack under this pressure, but Mus'ab, he didn't do it in this case. He continued to stay on his Islam, as he knew that was much more valuable. And later on, he becomes one of the main students of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So much so that later on, before the time of the Hijrah, before the Meccans migrated to Medina, the Prophet, he chose to send Mus'ab ibn Umayr as an ambassador, in a sense. He chose to send him to the people of Medina to kind of guide them, help them until the Muslims can make the full migration. So he was entrusted with such a strong and such a huge responsibility to guide these new people to Islam and to be their beacon, and basically to be their guide in whatever it is they needed to learn about Islam. So this shows how much the Prophet ﷺ, he valued Mus'ab. And they knew his background and what he was before. So in this sense, and later on, obviously, his life goes on much more. And he ends up dying as a shaheed in one of the battles, in the Battle of Uhud. And we see the impact of Mus'ab ibn Umayr and how much he's done for the Muslim Ummah. And inshallah, in the second part of the khutbah, we'll go over a specific lesson that I want to take from his story and what we could do to use it in our lives. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulih al-Kareem, amma ba'd. So the main lesson that I wanted to take away from the story of Mus'ab ibn Umayr, that I think all of us, especially as young people, youth that were kind of around his age, when during his upbringing, was the virtue of sacrifice, right? The virtue of leaving things for the sake of Allah and choosing, to not fall into these pleasures and these desires that we may have. And the reason why I mentioned this example is because this is the biggest sacrifice that we've seen from Mus'ab, right? Imagine, you've had all your designer clothes, your nice car, your nice shoes, you have everything you could ask for in this dunya, right? Mus'ab had that since birth. He didn't even have to work for it. He just inherited it. But regardless of this, Mus'ab knew, once he saw the truth of Islam, he was able to sacrifice his whole lifestyle. So imagine, I'm not saying leave your parents. Alhamdulillah, we're all, in Muslim families for the most part. So in this situation, we don't have to make such a huge sacrifice. But the way we should see it is that we should sacrifice, certain things that might be displeasing to Allah, whether it be a bad habit, a person that takes us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever it may be that we're doing to displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sin. We shouldn't be, we should do our best to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than any of these things that we might be feeling or that we might want to do. So when Mus'ab was able to sacrifice his entire lifestyle, we're not even asking to sacrifice your entire lifestyle. Just sacrifice, make those small changes in your life. When you see, let's say it's a bad habit that you have, do your best to give it up, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. The person who has taqwa in Allah and fears Him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically, if he leaves something for that sake, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him a way out, right? Mus'ab, he left his situation, right? He became a Muslim and he left his mother, all these things, right? He became a poor person, like he had nothing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he didn't just leave him go astray. He elevated his status much greater, and ultimately he eventually became a shaheed. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gave him a way out. He gave him a way out through the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And just know that whenever you have a situation where it might be difficult for you to let go of a certain bad deed that you're doing constantly, think that do your best to let go of it, and just know, keep in mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you a way out in that sense. Whether how he gives you a way out, it'll come from the ways you least expect it. And another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he says, إنك لن تدع شيئا لله عز وجل إلا بدلك الله به ما هو خير لك منه. Basically what he's saying, verily you will not leave something for the sake of Allah except that you'll get something better in return, right? So this is very similar to the ayah that I just mentioned, or part of the ayah that I just mentioned, in that the Prophet ﷺ, we see both Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet. They're both telling us that when we leave something for the sake of Allah, don't think that you're losing something. If you're giving away money, you're giving away your time, right? Don't think that you're giving it away just for nothing, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you better than what you've given up, and He will reward you both in this life and in the next life. And I ask Allah to make us firm of those who are firm in our faith. I ask Allah to make us of those who sacrifice for His sake. Allahumma ighfir lana warhamna wa'afina wa'fu anna wa tajawaz an sayyi'atina. Allahumma inna nas'aluka ridaka wal jannah wa na'udhu bika min 'adhab al-qabr. Allahumma inna dhalamna anfusana wa in lam taghfir lana lanakuna min al-khasirin. Allahumma la taj'alna min al-khasirin. Allahumma la taj'alna min al-khasirin. Allahumma ij'alna min al-muhsinin wa min al-muttaqin wa min al-shakirin ومن عبادك الصالحين وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.